The Galaxy Council chamber was quiet as Ambassador John Miller walked toward the central podium. He had served Earth for 20 years in this place, and today would be his last day here. Behind him stood 3 other humans in formal diplomatic uniforms, and they all knew what was coming next. The massive amphitheater held representatives from 800 different alien species, and every single one of them was watching the humans now. Some looked smug, and others looked worried, but most just seemed curious about what the human ambassador would say. John reached the podium and placed his hands on the smooth metal surface. He took a breath and looked around at all the alien faces staring at him. For 300 years, humanity had been part of this council, and they had given everything to make it work. Human soldiers died, protecting alien worlds, and human scientists shared every discovery freely, and human diplomats worked day and night to keep peace between species that hated each other. But it was never enough, because the council never saw humans as equals. And that was about to change. The ambassador began speaking, and his voice carried clearly through the enormous room. He told them that humanity was leaving the council effective immediately, and that all human personnel would be recalled from council space within the week. He explained that human military fleets would withdraw from the 17 sectors they currently defended, and that human technology would no longer be shared with council members. His words were simple and clear and left no room for misunderstanding. A Velcrin ambassador stood up quickly, and his insect wings buzzed with agitation. The Velcrin were one of the founding species of the council, and they had always treated humans like children who needed guidance. He clicked his mandibles together and demanded to know how humans could abandon their responsibilities. He said that Earth had benefited from council protection and council trade and council knowledge for 3 centuries. He asked what humanity thought they could accomplish alone in the galaxy. John smiled at the Velcrin, but there was no warmth in that smile. He said the Velcrin had things backward, but they would understand soon enough. Then he placed a small data crystal on the podium and explained that it contained all the research and technology and tactical information that humans had shared over the years. He called it a parting gift and said humans would be taking their real innovations with them when they left. Another alien spoke up, and this one was a Hevron who communicated through flashing lights in their jelly-like body. The Hevron said that leaving now would be abandonment, because the breach wars were still raging at the edge of the galaxy. They reminded everyone that human fleets held 17 critical defensive sectors, and asked how those sectors would be protected without Earth's military. The human ambassador replied that those fleets would be gone within 7 days. He said they had already sent warnings to civilian populations in those sectors, and suggested the council redeploy their own forces to cover the gaps. The way he said it made clear that this was not his problem anymore, and the council would have to figure things out on their own, across the galaxy. A human captain named Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of her ship. The Earth defense ship Valiant was a powerful warship, and Lisa had commanded it for 12 years. She had fought in 6 major battles and defended 4 different alien homeworlds and lost too many crew members to count. Now she stood watching her tactical display as hundreds of human ships across the galaxy began moving toward Earth space. Every ship was leaving Council territory and heading home. Her first officer was Lieutenant Greg Mason, and he had served with Lisa for 8 years. He reported that all human ships were ready to depart, but the Council was sending urgent messages demanding they stay in position till replacement forces arrived. Greg looked at his captain and waited for her response. Lisa told him to inform the Council that their demands were no longer relevant to humanity. She ordered the navigation officer to plot a course for Earth at maximum speed. As she gave the order, she felt no regret at all, and only relief that this moment had finally come. For too many years humans had done the hard work while other species took credit and demanded more. Greg told her that the Velcrin ambassador was now on the emergency channel, calling the human withdrawal treason and abandonment. The alien was furious and threatening consequences for this violation of Council charter. The captain thought about all the times the Council had violated their own charter when it came to humans. She thought about how Earth had requested colony expansion rights 247 times in 3 centuries and been approved only 3 times. She thought about how humans shared every technological breakthrough while the Council kept their best technology classified above human security clearance. She thought about all the human soldiers who died protecting alien civilians while Council species kept their own fleets safely in core systems. Lisa told Greg to inform the Velcrin that the charter was broken long before today, and then she told him to terminate the communication channel. She said they were done talking to people who never listened. Then she ordered her crew to take the ship home to Earth, and the Valiant's powerful engines began powering up for the long journey. The ship joined a massive stream of human vessels, all heading in the same direction. Hundreds of military ships and thousands of transport vessels and supply ships and hospital ships, all leaving Council space at once. The sight was beautiful in a way, because it showed the true scale of human presence in the galaxy. For 3 centuries, Earth had spread its people and resources across thousands of light years. And now, all of that was coming back home. On the Valiant's main view screen, the Council station grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a distant point of light. Lisa stood watching it disappear and knew she would never return to that place. Behind them in the sectors they were abandoning, the first signs of trouble were already appearing. Without human fleets to hold the defensive lines, the breach forces would soon push forward. Alien colonies would fall, and billions would die, but that was no longer humanity's burden to carry. Greg stood beside his captain and asked quietly if she thought they were doing the right thing. Lisa looked at him and said they had done the right thing for 300 years, and it got them nothing but contempt. Now, they would do what was right for humanity and let the Council face the consequences of treating their most loyal members like servants. The Valiant jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished from Council space, and across the galaxy, thousands of other human ships did the same. 3 months had passed since the humans left, and the Galaxy Council was falling apart. The huge amphitheater that once held 800 species now had barely 200 representatives, and the empty seats told a story of chaos and destruction. Some species had fled to safer regions of space, and others had simply stopped coming because their governments no longer existed. The galaxy was burning, and everyone knew it. Supreme Counselor Vex was a Hevron who had led the Council for 6 centuries, and he had never seen things this bad. His body flashed with colors that showed fear and distress as he called for reports on the military situation. A Velcrin named Kresh stood up to give the briefing, and his mechanical implants whirred as he activated the holographic display. The map of the galaxy appeared above the center of the room, in vast areas at the outer rim glowed angry red. Dotatia explained that the breach forces had overrun 17 sectors in just 90 days. Without human fleets holding the defensive lines, the enemy had pushed forward like a flood through broken walls. 400 colonies had fallen, and the death count was estimated at 70 billion civilians. The Velcrin's voice was flat as he delivered these numbers, but everyone in the room understood what they meant. This was a catastrophe unlike anything the Council had faced in 1,000 years. The chamber erupted in angry voices, as aliens shouted at each other in dozens of different languages. A Drachner representative slammed his clawed hand on his console hard enough to crack the surface. He demanded to know where the replacement fleets were, and why Council forces had not filled the gaps left by human withdrawal. His golden scales rippled with fury as he spoke. Kresh's wings drooped in a gesture of defeat, and he explained the terrible truth. The Council did not have enough military forces to replace what humanity had provided. Human fleets had made up 47% of all Council defensive capability, and nobody had realized it until those fleets were gone. For 3 centuries, the Council had relied on human soldiers to do the hard fighting while their own species maintained minimal military forces. Now, they were paying the price for that. Dependents and old Counselor protested that humans had been bound by treaty to protect Council space. He said they had no legal right to leave during wartime, and demanded they be declared rogue and sanctioned. Several other counselors voiced agreement, and the room filled with angry calls for human punishment. Ambassador Terrell stood up, and his voice cut through the chaos. Terrell was a Zindari, and his species had only joined the Azendar a century ago. so he remembered what it was like to be the newcomer. He said that humans had every right to leave because they invoked Article 17 of the Council Charter. That article allowed any species to withdraw immediately if they could prove systematic discrimination and resource exploitation. The humans had provided extensive documentation of both. Counselor Vex flashed colors of anger and insisted that humans had been treated fairly and equally. He said Earth had the same rights and privileges as any council member, and this withdrawal was just human arrogance and selfishness. Trell pulled up records on the main display and began reading facts that made many counselors uncomfortable. In 300 years of membership, humans had proposed 247 requests for colony expansion, and the council approved only 3 of them. Meanwhile, the Velkrin had been granted unlimited expansion rights. Humans had contributed 62 major technological breakthroughs to council databases, but in return they received only technology that the council deemed appropriate for their development level. Human soldiers made up nearly half of all combat forces, but held less than 5% of command positions. The ambassador continued speaking over the protests and objections. He said the council had built its prosperity on human backs and called it partnership. He said they had sent human soldiers to die in wars while keeping their own fleet safe in core systems. He said they had demanded human innovations while restricting human access to markets and resources. The truth was ugly and undeniable. On Earth, the human president, named Karen Foster, watched the council session through intercepted communications. Her office in Geneva overlooked a planet that looked different now. Millions of soldiers and scientists and colonists had returned from council space, and Earth was transforming with their presence. The planet buzzed with energy and purpose as humanity turned its attention inward for the first time in centuries. Director Alon Price stood beside her desk and reported on the galactic situation. He was the head of Earth's intelligence, and his job was to track everything happening beyond human space. He said the council was collapsing faster than their projections had predicted, and the breach forces were meeting almost no resistance. Entire sectors were going dark as colonies were destroyed or abandoned. Karen asked about civilian casualties, and Alan's face showed the weight of those numbers. He said casualties were very high because the council had not evacuated border colonies despite human warnings. Then he mentioned that humanitarian groups on Earth were calling for intervention. They wanted human fleets to return and help the aliens who were dying. The president turned from the window, and her expression was hard as stone. She said they had issued warnings and given the council time to prepare. She said they had offered to evacuate human colonists from dangerous sectors, but only 30% had accepted because the rest believed council propaganda that Earth was bluffing. Now those people were paying for their trust in the wrong government. Alan said quietly that billions of innocent civilians were dying and they had done nothing wrong. He said history would judge humanity harshly for standing by and watching this. Catastrophe. Karen replied that history could say whatever it wanted because her responsibility was to humanity first. She said the council had 3 centuries to treat Earth as an equal partner, and they chose exploitation instead. She said she would not spend one more human life protecting people who still believed humans were the problem. Her voice was cold and final. The director shifted uncomfortably and said nothing more, but his face showed he was not entirely convinced. Karen understood his discomfort, but she also understood that leadership meant making hard choices. Humanity had given enough, and now it was time to rebuild their own civilization. Across human space, something remarkable was happening. Dr. Amy Zhang worked in the largest research facility on Mars, and she was overseeing the integration of recovered human technology. For 3 centuries, Earth had shared every innovation with the Council, but now those innovations were coming home. The scale of what they had given away was staggering. Her colleague, Dr. Frank Liu, asked how much technology humanity had actually shared with the Council. Amy pulled up inventory lists that scrolled for minutes and said they had given everything that mattered. Quantum communication systems in 0 point. Energy extraction and biological regeneration and medical nanotechnology and gravity manipulation technology. Every major breakthrough had been handed over freely because humans believed in the Council's mission. Frank asked what they received in return, and Amy showed him comparison charts. The Council had given humans access to technology that Earth had either already developed independently or would have created within a few years anyway. In some cases, the Council technology was actually less advanced than what human scientists had already achieved. It had been 3 centuries of one-sided transfer. Amy pulled up new project files and said that everything was about to change. With human scientists back on Earth and resources under their own control and no Council restrictions on research, they were going to advance faster than ever before. She said 300 years of progress would look like a warm-up exercise compared to what was coming next. 6 months after humanity left the Council, the galaxy was burning worse than anyone had imagined possible. The breach forces had launched a massive invasion, and they were winning everywhere they attacked. Council fleets retreated sector by sector, and they could not hold against an enemy that they had barely contained when humans led the defense. The Council was dying, and everyone knew it, in the Council chamber. Supreme Counselor Vex called an emergency meeting, and his body flashed colors that showed resignation and defeat. The remaining counselors gathered to hear news that nobody wanted to accept. Vex announced that the Velcrin home system had fallen, and the breach was now only 18 jumps away from the Council core worlds. The silence that followed was like death itself. The Velcrin had been one of the founding species of the Council, and their empire had spanned 3,000 systems for millennia. Now, in less than 6 months, they were refugees fleeing from destroyed worlds. If the breach could destroy the Velcrin, then no species was safe, and everyone in that chamber understood it. Ambassador Trell stood up and said what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to admit. They had to negotiate with the humans and ask for help. They needed human fleets and human tactics and human leadership if they wanted to survive. His words fell like stones into water. A Drachner counselor hissed in anger and said that humans had abandoned them. He asked why Earth would help now after walking away when the Council needed them most. Several other aliens voiced agreement, and the chamber filled with bitter voices. Trell looked around at the frightened faces and said that humans would help because that was what humans did. Despite everything the Council had done to them, and despite having every right to refuse, they would help because humans had an irrational need to protect others. The Council just needed to ask properly and offer something real in return. 2 weeks later, a small diplomatic ship arrived at Earth's orbital station. There was no ceremony or grand procession this time, and no proud speeches about Council superiority. The delegation came quietly like beggars asking for bread. Ambassador Trell led them into a simple meeting room where President Karen Foster waited with her advisors. Trell bowed low in a gesture his species reserved for those they considered superior. He requested an audience, and his voice was humble in a way that Council ambassadors had never been before. Karen told him he had her attention and invited the delegation to sit down. The aliens settled into chairs, and Trell activated a holographic display showing the military situation. Red zones covered more than a third of the galaxy now, and the remaining Council territory looked like an island being eaten by the sea. He said he would not insult human intelligence by pretending things were anything other than desperate. The Council was failing, and the breach was winning, and within a year or two, the core worlds would fall. Director Alan Price said flatly that the Council wanted humanity to save them. Trell nodded and admitted that was exactly right. He said the Council had been wrong about everything, and they knew it now. They had treated humans as subordinates when Earth deserved equality. They had exploited human generosity while giving nothing meaningful in return. They had sent human soldiers to die while protecting their own people. He said the Council deserved what was happening to them. Karen leaned forward and asked if the billions of civilians dying in the invasion deserved it. She asked if those people had chosen how the Council treated humanity. Her voice was sharp. Trell said quietly that innocent people never deserve to suffer for their government's mistakes. But he was not here to appeal to human mercy, because that had been tried and failed before. Instead, he was here to offer what the Council should have offered 3 centuries ago, and that was true partnership. He placed a data crystal on the table and explained what it contained. Complete access to Council technology archives, including everything they had kept classified above human clearance. Ancient knowledge from species that existed before the current Council formed, medical technology that could extend human lifespans by centuries, Energy systems that would make current human power generation look primitive. Everything was being offered with no restrictions. Karen asked what the council wanted in exchange, and everyone in the room knew the answer already. Trell said they wanted human help, but more than that, they wanted human leadership. The council had been built on the idea that older species knew best, and that age brought wisdom. That belief had been wrong and nearly destroyed them. Humanity had achieved in 300 years what took other species millennia, and humans innovated and adapted in ways the council had forgotten were possible. Admiral Ryan Cooper was the head of Terran Defense Forces, and he spoke up from his position across the table. He said the council was asking humans to die for them again, and asking human soldiers to risk their lives protecting species that still thought Earth was inferior. His voice was hard with old anger. Trell shook his head and said that was not what he was asking. He wanted humans to fight beside the council as equals and help rebuild something better than what had existed before. More than that, he was offering humans command of the council's entire military force. Every ship and every soldier would follow human leadership. The room fell completely silent as people processed what had just been offered. Karen looked at her advisors, and they looked back at her with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion. She told Trell they needed 48 hours to consult with their government and military leaders before making any decision. The ambassador stood and bowed again. Before he left, he said one more thing to the president. He had spent 6 months studying human history, trying to understand why Earth was different from other species. He had found a quote from one of humanity's ancient wars that said humans fight not because they hate what is in front of them, but because they love what is behind them. That was why humans would help, despite everything, because that was who they were at there. Karen met his eyes and said maybe that was true, or maybe humans had learned that protecting what was behind them meant dealing with threats in front of them. Either way, she said, humanity had changed. If Earth agreed to help, then it would be on human terms, and the council would have to accept that. Her tone left no room for negotiation. After the delegation left, Karen stood at her window looking down at Earth. Director Lan asked if she was seriously considering this offer. She said they had no choice, because if the breach destroyed the council, they would eventually come for humanity. Better to fight now with allies than later alone. But this time, humans would be partners and leaders instead of servants and tools. Captain Lisa Hayes received orders 3 days later. She stood on the bridge of the Valiant and read the message twice to make sure she understood correctly. Earth was forming the largest human armada ever assembled, and she was being promoted to Fleet Admiral. 2,000 human warships would deploy within the week. Her first officer, Greg Mason, reported that volunteer crews from council species wanted to serve under human command. Lisa approved their transfers and thought about how much had changed in just 6 months. The council that once treated humans like children was now begging to follow their leadership. She ordered the fleet to prepare for deployment and begin battle drills immediately. The Kelleran system looked like a graveyard floating in space. Thousands of destroyed ships from both sides littered the area between planets and debris fields marked where desperate battles had been fought and lost. The breach forces had been minutes away from breaking through to the council core worlds when the human lead armada arrived to stop them. Admiral Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valiant, studying the tactical display. Her ship was now the flagship of the combined fleet, and she carried the weight of command for every vessel in the system. The breach fleet outnumbered them 3-1, but numbers were not everything in war. She had learned that lesson many times over the years. Lieutenant Greg Mason highlighted sections of the enemy formation on the display. He explained that the breach was using the same tactics they had used for months now, which was overwhelming force concentrated into massive waves. Those tactics had worked against council fleets because the aliens fought defensively and tried to preserve their forces instead of winning battles. Lisa said they were not the council anymore, and things were going to be different. She opened a communication channel to every ship in the armada and told them that breach expected them to fight cautiously like the council always had. Instead, they were going to do what humans did best, and that was attack with everything they had. Admiral Ryan Cooper commanded the massive dreadnought named Defiant, and his voice came through the channel clearly. He ordered all ships to execute Battle Plan Delta 7 and told human vessels to prepare for aggressive engagement. Council ships were assigned to support positions because this first battle would show everyone what human tactics looked like. The Armada split into dozens of smaller battle groups, and each group was led by a human commander who had studied breach tactics for months. Instead of forming a defensive line and waiting for the enemy to attack, they charged straight into the breach formation. The aliens were not expecting this, and their response was slow and confused. The Valiant's weapons tore through a breach cruiser, and the enemy ship exploded in a ball of fire. Greg reported that breach ships were trying to reform their lines, but they were adapting too slowly. Lisa ordered her crew to keep the pressure on and target the enemy command vessels because confused enemies made mistakes. Across the battlefield, human innovations turned the tide of combat. Ships equipped with experimental gravity weapons created pockets of twisted space that pulled breach vessels into kill zones where they were destroyed by concentrated fire. Zero-point energy shields absorbed damage that would have obliterated Council ships. Most importantly, human commanders made tactical decisions in seconds, while Council committees would have needed hours to debate the same choices. Commander Jake Sullivan led a squadron of Condor fighters through the breach defensive line. His pilots were executing maneuvers that would have been considered suicide by Council standards, but human pilots trained differently. Jake told his people to remember their training and stay fast and aggressive and unpredictable. He said the enemy could only react to what they could predict. His squadron punched through to the massive carrier ships that launched waves of breach attack craft. One by one, the carriers exploded under focused assault, and each explosion cut off the enemy's ability to sustain their attack. Without carriers to launch from the small breach, fighters had nowhere to return, and they became easy targets. Lieutenant Sarah Kim was Jake's wingman, and she reported that breach forces were trying to flank their position. Jake checked his tactical display and smiled, because flanking maneuvers only worked if you were faster than your opponent. He told Sarah to let them try because navigation was a human specialty in the breach. He was about to learn that the hard way. The battle raged for 18 hours without pause. Ships on both sides were destroyed and people died by the thousands, but slowly the tide turned. Human tactics of aggressive assault and rapid adaptation overwhelmed the breach forces, who were used to fighting static defensive battles. When the last breach ship jumped away into retreat, the battlefield belonged to humanity and its allies. Lisa stood on the bridge, reviewing damage reports and casualty numbers. They had lost 70 ships and 12,000 human lives in the battle. The Council would have considered that a catastrophic defeat and retreated immediately. But humans measured success differently because they had destroyed or disabled more than 400 breach vessels and saved the Kelleran system from invasion. She transmitted to all ships and congratulated them on a hard-fought victory. Then she ordered rescue operations to begin for survivors from both sides and told medical teams to prepare for incoming wounded. Greg said quietly that Council observers wanted to speak with her. The holographic display showed 3 Council officials who had been aboard various ships to witness the battle. Ambassador Trell spoke first and said what they had just seen was remarkable. The Council had been fighting the breach for 5 years, without achieving a single decisive victory like this one. Lisa replied that the difference was simple because the Council fought not to lose while humans fought to win. She said those were 2 completely different approaches to warfare and produced completely different results. A Velcrin observer clicked his mandibles and said that human tactics would be considered reckless by Council military doctrine. Yet somehow those reckless tactics had worked better than anything the Council had tried. The Admiral looked at the alien and said that reckless was letting perfect caution lead to certain defeat. Humans calculated their risks carefully and then took those risks when necessary. That was something the Council had forgotten how to do over centuries of playing it safe. On Earth, President Karen Foster addressed the Terran Assembly, while representatives from every human colony world watched. She outlined the new reality that everyone needed to understand. The Battle of Kelleran had proved what many had believed for years, which was that humanity did not need the councils. Protection because the council needed humanity's protection instead. She displayed a revised council charter on the main screen and explained these were Earth's terms for continued cooperation. True equality among all species with no exceptions. Voting rights proportional to population and contribution instead of based on how old a species was. Removal of all restrictions on human expansion and research. Most importantly, leadership positions in the council based on merit and ability instead of species age or political connections. One representative objected and said many would see this as humans demanding control of the council. Karen replied that they could see it however they wanted, but Earth was not demanding control. Humans were demanding the chance to earn leadership through their actions, and if other species proved to be better commanders, or better administrators, or better leaders, then those species should have the positions. The days of restricting people based on what species they were born into were over forever. Director Alan Price reminded everyone about the human cost. 12,000 lives lost in one battle, and if they continued this campaign, tens of thousands more would die. Karan said every one of those soldiers had volunteered knowing the risks. They were not fighting for the old council that had exploited them, but for a new galaxy where humanity would have real voice, and real power, and real respect. Dr. Amy Zhang celebrated a different kind of victory on Mars. While the military fought in space, her research teams had been integrating council technology archives into human systems. She reported to the president that 70% of the archives had been processed, and most of it was technology Earth would have developed independently within a decade. Karen asked about the remaining 30%, and Amy said there were some genuine breakthroughs mixed in with the outdated information. Medical advances that could extend human lifespan by 200 years. Terraforming technology that would make any world habitable in months instead of centuries. Something called quantum consciousness, mapping that would take years to fully understand, but had incredible potential. The president asked when they could begin implementing these technologies. Amy said the medical advances could start tomorrow and terraforming systems could be ready in 6 months. The consciousness mapping technology was more complex. It might take years to master, but early research suggested it could allow backing up human minds and possibly even achieving a form of immortality. Karen felt a chill at those words because that was technology the council had deliberately kept from humanity. They had not trusted Earth with such power, and now humans would prove whether that distrust was justified or just another form of discrimination. 1 year after the Battle of Kelleran, the galaxy looked completely different than anyone could have imagined. The Breach forces had retreated back to their home territory after losing 3 more major battles to human-led fleets. The border was finally stable for the first time in 6 years of war. But the real change was not in military victories because the Galaxy Council itself had been rebuilt from the ground up. The new council chamber on the neutral world of Meridian Prime showed how much things had changed. Instead of the old amphitheater with its levels that put founding species above everyone else, the new chamber was circular. Every species sat at the same level as equals, and nobody had special privileges based on how old their civilization was. At the center podium stood Fleet Admiral Lisa Hayes, who now commanded all council military forces. She addressed the assembly and told them about Operation Restoration, which had liberated 30 systems from breach control over the past 6 months. Refugee populations were returning to their homeworlds in combined fleets, patrolled borders that had not been secure in years. All of this had been achieved not through human dominance, but through genuine cooperation between species. Lisa highlighted several council species on the display screens. The Zindari diplomatic corps had negotiated ceasefires that saved hundreds of colonies from invasion. Velcrin engineers had rebuilt infrastructure on liberated worlds faster than anyone thought possible. Drakner medical teams had treated millions of wounded from dozens of different species. Human forces had provided the military strength that made everything else possible. This was what the galaxy could accomplish when everyone worked together as true partners. Ambassador John Miller now served as Earth's permanent representative to the Reformed Council. He stood to speak and told the assembly they were at a crossroads in galactic history. The old council had failed because it valued tradition over innovation and age over merit and stability over growth. They could not go back to that broken system. The new council had to be built on principles of equality and merit-based advancement and shared sacrifice. A Velcrin counselor who was part of the old guard stood up and clicked his mandibles in challenge. He said humans spoke of equality, yet human influence was growing every day. Human fleets defended the borders, and human technology advanced everyone's capabilities, and human administrators managed reconstruction efforts. He asked how this was different from one species dominating all the others. President Karen Foster appeared on the holographic display from Earth. She said the difference was simple because humanity was not keeping anything for themselves. Every innovation that human scientists developed was shared immediately with all council members. Every leadership position was open to any species that proved they were capable. Earth was not building a human empire, but rather helping. To build a true galactic civilization, she displayed statistics. On the main screens that showed human colony expansion, in the past year had been matched by expansion from 6 other species. Human technology archives were open to everyone with no restrictions or classifications. Earth had even proposed term limits for all council positions, including those held by humans. None of that looked like a species trying to dominate the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as counselors looked at the evidence. Finally, Supreme Counselor Vex, who had somehow kept his position through all the changes, spoke up. His body flashed colors that showed acceptance and maybe even respect. He said he had been wrong about humanity and admitted the whole council had been wrong. Humans had forced them to change not through conquest or threats, but by showing them what they had become. The council had grown stagnant and fearful and dependent on systems that no longer served anyone. Ambassador Trell added that humanity had given the council a gift by leaving. That departure had forced every species to ask why anyone would want to stay in the council. Answering that question meant confronting hard truths and rebuilding everything from scratch. The galaxy was better for it. On Earth, the transformation continued in ways both wonderful and frightening. Medical technology from the council archives meant humans could potentially live for centuries. Now, Dr. Amy Zhang addressed these concerns in a public forum that was broadcast. Across all of human space, she explained that extended lifespans did not mean stagnation, but rather opportunity. People would have time to master multiple fields and see long-term projects through to completion and learn from centuries of experience, but humanity had to be careful not to become what the old council species had been. Age could not equal automatic authority, and experience could not mean being closed to new ideas. A young researcher named Dr. Ben Clark challenged her from the audience. He asked how they would prevent older people from hoarding power the way council's species had done. Those aliens had lived for centuries and become rigid and resistant to change. What made humans think they would be different? Amy replied that awareness of the danger was the first step toward preventing it. Humanity was implementing cultural safeguards like mandatory retirement from leadership positions after set terms regardless of age. Research funding would go to young scientists and not just established ones. Constitutional protections would defend new ideas, even radical ones. They were learning from the council's mistakes instead of repeating them. Captain Jake Sullivan had returned from the front lines and now taught at Luna Academy. He addressed a graduating class of new pilots who would soon join the fleet. He told them they were entering a military that was completely different from the one he had joined years ago. Humans were not subordinates anymore, but leaders in a truly integrated defense network. That came with serious responsibility. He paced in front of the young faces watching him and said their generation would never know what it felt like to be dismissed or ignored because they were human. They would work alongside aliens who respected them as equals from day one. He told them not to take that for granted because it had been paid for with blood and sacrifice. One cadet asked if he thought the peace would last. Jake considered the question carefully before answering. He said the breach would return eventually, and there would always be new threats in a galaxy this large. But the new council was better prepared now, and more importantly, they were united in ways they never were before. The old council had been an alliance of convenience, but the new council was a true partnership. That was worth fighting to defend. 5 years after humanity departed from the old, Council President Karen Foster stood in the rebuilt chamber for a historic vote. The measure before them would restructure the founding, charter and make permanent the principles of equality and merit-based leadership and shared governance that had emerged from the crisis. Supreme Counselor Vex called for the vote, and lights illuminated across the chamber as species after species voted yes. When the final count was finished, the measure had passed with 93% approval. Karen felt tears in her eyes because this moment represented 300 years of struggle. 3 centuries of being treated as lesser and fighting for recognition. It had taken walking away from everything to make them understand. Ambassador Terrell approached her after the vote and said, humanity had saved the council. Not just from the breach, but from themselves. Humans had shown everyone that the price of stagnation was irrelevance and eventual destruction. Karen said humans did not do it to be saviors. They did it because it was the right thing, and because they believed in what the council could become if it changed. Terrell asked what she thought the council would become now. The president looked around at Terres, representatives from hundreds of species who were equals now, in truth, and not just in name. She said she believed they were building something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization that valued innovation over tradition and merit over age and potential over precedent. A galaxy where any species and any individual could rise as far as their abilities would take them. Trell observed that this sounded like the human dream. Karen corrected him gently and said, no, this was the universal dream. Humans had just refused to stop believing in it when everyone else gave up. Admiral Lisa Hayes watched her fleet patrol the borders of Council space from the Bridge of the Valiant. Human ships flew in formation alongside Velkrin and Zindari and Drakner and dozens of other species. Her crew was now 40% non-human because aliens had requested transfers to serve under her command. Commander Greg Mason reported that long-range sensors detected something at the galactic rim. It might be another breach incursion forming up. Lisa ordered the fleet to battle stations, but then she made a different choice. She contacted the new Velkrin patrol groups and told them to take the lead on this one. Humans had taught them well, and now it was time to see if they had learned. The Velkrin commander responded quickly and said they would not let her down. Lisa watched as Velkrin ships moved to intercept, using tactics that showed clear human influence, but with innovations of their own. That was the real victory, she thought. Not that humans had saved the galaxy, but that they had taught the galaxy to save itself. Across human space, on hundreds of colony worlds, and in research, stations and military academies, and on ships patrolling, the Void humanity continued its work. They had left the Galaxy Council to prove their worth and demand respect. They had returned not as subordinates, but as leaders who earned their position through sacrifice and skill and innovation. The day humans departed, the Galaxy Council was the day the universe learned a lesson it should have known all along. True strength comes not from ancient tradition or species pride, but from the courage to demand change and the wisdom to accept it. And the determination to build something better than what came before. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly how it should be.